Hello, I am Natalia Wojtkowiak and you are listening to the Manage the Problem podcast. I create this place for owners and decision makers of small and medium-sized manufacturing companies. In this podcast, I talk openly and specifically about the problems of production industry. I explain complex issues related to production management in simple language. I advise on how to create optimized processes and effective teams. This is podcast created by practitioner for practitioners. Let me be your guide and the Manage the Problem boat that will take us to the waters of practical knowledge and proven solutions. I hope you are ready. Manage the problem. What do we want to avoid most in production process? Mistake. Error that increases the cost of your production every time, and which, if it's significant oversight, can be counted in currency more valuable than euros or dollars. Trust. Of course, there are numerous ways to protect the process, production, and you for such a situation. And today I will tell you about two of them: blind test and red rabbit test. Let's manage the problem. If you have never heard of blind test and red rabbit test, you probably think they are some underground bands from 18s from United Kingdom. Well, I must admit that the names are fancy as for our industry, but when we get to know topic better, as always, names are engineering specific and adequate, and effective of course. I implement and worked with both tests during projects I run in production companies, and this test always brought great results. Well, I wouldn't recommend you ineffective methods. Let's start with the blind test. It is used to check the correctness of quality assessment of product that has passed stage or entire production process. It is a great test of knowledge of quality requirements and it's often used to check visual inspection. How did it look like for my projects? In one of the companies, one of my tasks was create implementation and a re-education program for leaders and operators. An element of these two trainings was blind test. Together with the quality and the process engineer, we took the finished products from the line and we damaged each of them, showed every defect that the customer and our quality department didn't allow. We also took some good products and from these two mixed groups, we prepared something like exhibit table. On this table, each product had its place and next of it, there was a board with description of non-compliance it represent or information that the product was good. During the test, boards were turned over so that description wasn't visible. As you may have already suspect, the test involves guessing which product on the table is defective and why, and which is okay. Easy and how effective. I recommend that this test be introduced at onboarding level as a check on quality knowledge and understanding of risk to the process. I am of opinion that the quarterly or semi-annual test should be carried out for all operators. And the answer for me isn't that they know. Routine and habit are very dangerous for a process, and in production they are surprisingly quickly and easy come. So if your production doesn't produce individual unique product, blind test should be part of process. It should be added also that blind test is very flexible in terms of modifications and can be easily adapted to current needs and requirements, and it is great. But I must be honest and mention that the blind test is a method responsive to subjectivity of assessment. What that means? I often met situations where product that was detected as defective by one operator or engineer is already approved by another one. That is why I am very need to ensure that the definitions of what is a defect and why and when should be unanimous. Otherwise, minor defects will start with downplay it and only take a moment for small mistakes to turn into serious problems. It would be good if I also mentioned that the preparing this test may be expensive if the price of one piece is high and you have to damage it. Otherwise, it may be time-consuming, as you should collect examples for damage that they occurred naturally in process or were complained and weren't made specially to illustrate the defect. You can ask, okay, I have expensive product. Can I take photo of this defect as a blind test? My answer is depends. Because generally, what is important in this test is this feeling, seeing the entire product and noticing defect in it. I would keep that in mind. From my experience and observation, I can tell you this. If the condition of consistency in preventing defect is met, the test will quickly result in an increase in employee awareness. The second topic of today's episode is Red Rabbit test. It involves introducing a non-compliant element into the process and observing whether it will be catched in the process and when. And while the blind test supports non-automated or semi-automated process very well, our rabbit will work great in both manual processes, but also, above all, in automated processes. How can you make this test on your production? Prepare and mark defective product, so-called verification sample, that you will introduce into your production line. You can prepare several of them at each stage of production and adapt it to the defect that a given system should detect. And now you are waiting to see how quickly the control system will detect the defect and how quick production will communicate it. You can also check what the operator and leader will do with this information. Because it is opportunity to check not only operation of machine and its sensitivity, but also work humans with machine and human with processes. It may turn out that there will be no reaction, and this is a signal to you, to your team, that you either need to implement a non-conformance response process or place more emphasis on training and quality awareness. If the system doesn't detect any inconsistencies, it will send a message that it needs to be reset or modified. As you perform this test, I want you to be aware of certain risks. First, samples may not always accurately reflect the nonconformity and all its variants, which may lead to the false sense of quality assurance. And the second one, the sample verification process is one-time measurement, which means that any problem in production can be missed if they aren't present in the samples. In my opinion, a common mistake in action and the discussion about error prevention is focused only on achieving a positive result and not prepare for possibility of negative one. The system can recognize positive samples but isn't trained to detect negative samples. That is why I encourage you to create polarized tests. And now, I think that it would be a huge omission if I didn't mention the most famous correctness control method in this episode, Pokeyoke. If you hear this name for the first time, it is the prevention and checking activity in production process, Pokeyoke's. Task is to introduce tools, devices, and activities into the process that will help detect irregularities and prevent them from happening. In Japanese, it literally means poke mistake, yoke to avoid. This method is based on the 6 assumptions, where the first 4 are its core and the 2 are the minimization of mistake probability, and so on. First, elimination of errors by redesigning production processes so that there is no possibility of making a mistake in a given task. Second, preventing errors by designing the production structure to minimize the possibility of making production mistake. Next one, replacing inefficient production processes with more reliable ones that help detect specific irregularity. Fourth, improving production by facilitating individual processes. Fifth, detecting errors by, for example, installing devices to use various types of sensors to prevent incorrect installation of element. And the sixth, mitigating the effects of error, for example, starting the minimize of effect of committed defects. In theory, as always, everything sounds so smart and easy and general. Because what it means for you, for your process to design the product so that there is no possibility of making mistake. What that means? I want to give you a clear answer because I don't know details of your process, but maybe these examples will help for you. Do you have a USB cable? For sure you have. And its tip is designed in such a way that you can only connect it one way for it to work. Another real-life example. When you insert your ATM card upside down instead of with the chip facing up and forward, the ATM split it out, or you won't turn on the dishwasher unless you close the door. It won't work. The idea of this method is create a situation that will block the next step. It should be the same in your production. How can you do this? In 4 ways. First, introducing the appropriate sequences in the process. If you fail to save it, you cannot complete the next task and move on the process. Second, informing. Simple, clear, and direct information helps in error-free execution of tasks. Next one, grouping. It involves preparing set of all materials that details necessary to perform a given activities. Thanks to this, employees don't have to waste time looking for necessary elements. They have everything at hand. And the last one, physical limitation, introduced in the design or operation of devices to prevent confusion. Yes, devices will optimize your process very efficiently. We can divide them in 2 types. Control devices and warning devices. Control devices, control method devices detect the problem and replace production even before error is made in a given operation. It may be, for example, element pickup sensor. Warning devices, Poke-Yoke device which has warning function, signals any deviation by, for example, shining yellow or red light. Sometimes it completely blocks production that doesn't comply with the guidelines. Unlike the Poke-Yoke control device, the warning device doesn't stop the production process with each occurrence. So these 2 types can check weight, dimension, orientation of components, and their quantity. Very useful, I recommend. So if we combine these 3 methods, I would advise making Poke-Yoke a daily element of process before the line starts and the beginning of the new shift, after changeover, and randomly checking during the process from time to time. I would recommend the Red Rabbit test and blind test to be a cyclical test and not to be skipped. They really do a great job of checking the process environment and the knowledge about it among people involved in it. I see I have been talking a lot of today, but I believe you got a lot of information and valuable tips. I keep my finger crossed for your implementation. Check next episode of Manage the Problem podcast. I will also be grateful for any substantive feedback, positive comments, and sharing this episode with others in our industry. I want this podcast to be a value and interesting for you. You can find me on LinkedIn. See you in next episode. Manage the Problem. Natalia Wojtkowiak.